Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Open Observability Talks. I'm your host, Dotan Horvitz, and here at Open Observability Talks, we talk about anything DevOps, observability, and open source, so may the open source be with you. This month, we had Open Source Summit North America, the flagship event of the Linux Foundation, which this year was held in Denver. I even put on the shirt of the event for those watching us. This year, however, it was accompanied by a very special event, the first ever Open Observability Summit. It's about time we had a vendor-neutral industry event dedicated to my passion topic, Open Observability. And since Monitorama isn't happening this year and not sure what's going to happen next, this is even more important now. I'm proud to say that the CNCF, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, has stepped up and stewarded this event. Disclaimer, I am a CNCF Ambassador. And the fit that it comes right after Open Source Summit, same venue, following day, is just perfect. We at Open Observability Talks are proud partners of Open Observability Summit and are happy to dedicate this episode to covering the highlights of this important event, both on-site and virtually. This special episode will actually have two parts. The first part was recorded on-site, the day before Open Observability Summit with Alok Bhide. Alok is a member of the event content committee and got to review the talk proposals and take part in selecting the talks for the agenda. Alok is an observability veteran, having worked at Splunk and SentinelOne, currently leads product innovation at Chronosphere. Alok will tell us about the conference goals, his insights from the talk submissions, and broader observability insights. The second part was recorded after the event concluded with Henrik Rexed. Henrik is a fellow CNCF ambassador and an observability veteran currently working as a developer advocate at Dynatrace, and is also a fellow podcaster running Is It Observable, excellent show dedicated to our favorite topic. So let's start with the first part, recorded in Denver, the eve of Open Observability Summit. Hey, glad to be here at Open Observability Talks for a very exciting episode. And thank you, Alok, for joining me on this very, very special episode.
Thanks, Rotel, for having me.
We're here at essentially sitting at Open Source Summit in Denver. That's like the flagship event for the Linux Foundation. We had the full 3 days. That's the last day, and actually the day leading up to the highlight that for which we are here in the conference, Open Observability Summit. A really exciting event dedicated for the topic that I love and the topic of this show, open source observability, arranged by the CNCF, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. So we're going to talk about this topic, and I invited Alok to join me here to tell us a bit about it. But Alok, you are also a veteran of observability space. You've been there for quite some time. So tell us a bit about yourself and the background in observability.
Sure, yeah. So I'm Alok. I'm the head of product innovation here at Chronosphere right now. Up until today, I've been in observability basically my whole career. So 9 years at Splunk, 1 year at SentinelOne, running their observability team, and also 2 years as a practitioner, CPO of a small company responsible for uptime and things like that. So we used a bunch of common open source, observability tools over there as well.
And today you're at Chronosphere and you're in charge of product innovation. I just told you before this chat that I envy this title. That sounds so exciting. Being a product manager in past life and product strategy, that was the part that I loved most about it, which is the product innovation, and you got to squarely be in that area. So you're leading the innovation in that area, right?
It is a fancy title. I do like it. What I'll say about it is that yes, I'm here at Chronosphere leading innovation across several projects. At this moment in time, a very specific one around logging, but that's my current role at this moment in time.
As I mentioned at the opening, this year we've decided in the CNCF to do a dedicated event for open source observability, the Open Observability Summit that will start today. And as I mentioned, I love it. And actually, I love the fact that we on the show, Open Observability Talks, are partners of this very precious event. Why is that event? I'm biased, but you tell us why is that such an important thing?
Let's talk about why observability, having a conference for observability is important in the first place. Look, observability is a common thing that every organization needs to be good at and is responsible for. So monitoring, troubleshooting, observability, however you want to phrase these things, these are critical things to any organization that's running today. And so it needs a forum for people to come, discuss, learn about everything related to observability. Specifically, the open source component is, again, the most ubiquitous thing out there. Everyone uses one or many open source technologies, and to that end, it needs a forum, it needs a place for people to come. And with Monotrama currently on pause, this is such a critical thing for the entire industry to really focus that attention in one place.
Yeah, I agree, and I think we have quite a few events out there for observability, but most of them are vendor-driven.
Correct.
And with all due respect, they're very respectful vendors in the observability space, but there is a very specific angle. I think you mentioned Monitorama. For those who don't know, this has been really a long-standing event in the monitoring and observability space. Even before observability, that's a Monitorama, when everything was monitoring, still stats only monitoring. But not having it this year is definitely a shame. And that was the place where that was vendor neutral, that wasn't vendor driven for the community to gather around, and even that wasn't foundation led. So I think the fact that we're having now a foundation led, open source driven, obviously CNCF is the house of the open source project, to do that and to bring the community together is great. And also seeing the responses. Actually, you were there on the program committee. You were there reviewing, amongst others, of course, on the committee, the CFP, the talk submissions. So maybe even though we were a day before, you already have a sneak peek on what the exciting things. So tell us a bit about what the exciting topics that we were about to hear during Open Observability Summit.
First, I'll talk a little bit about the balance of the talk. So as we went through the talks, one of the key things that we looked at is what is the balance of the talks? And from my perspective, many other reviewers, obviously not just me, but it's the balance of the talks that really gets to me. It gets me excited. It's a combination of foundational talks that are relevant to everybody who's sort of coming in new. No one's always an expert on something. No one only wants to talk about the shiny new thing, which today's day and age is AI. But no one only wants to talk about the shiny new thing. So that balance is what I'm excited about, because it really gives to the audience what they need. Then the second thing is it's across all these open source projects. It's not just focused on Otel or not just on one of the Prometheus or something like that. It's basically everything. Otel, Fluent Bit, Jaeger, Prometheus, everything. And this then gives all the entire audience a broad selection of things that they might care about, and they can then go to the talks and listen to whatever they want to learn more about, as opposed to just being locked into one thing. So those two things, the balance, there's a good balance of new and old, or new and required rather, and the breadth of the projects. That's really.
And by the way, I agree with you, because in many conferences I see the bleeding edge being discussed, the sexy topics. But a lot of our audience are beginners, and they just want to have the simple questions that some would say trivial, but they're not trivial at all, on how to get started, what's the best choice, what are the trade-offs, and so on. And because for the ones who are immersed in the topic, it seems like it's done and known and established, they don't stop to think about that. So, for example, within the CNCF, if you look at KubeCon, there is a designated track for the 101, exactly for that, so that you know that you can submit that, and you're not in competition with the sexier topics because you say the more basic ones, because this is exactly designated for that. So obviously it's a far smaller conference in this case, but I think it's something that we need to, all of us, especially the ones that live on the bleeding edge, to remember that the vast majority out there is actually far behind and need to get the basics done and reiterated and discussed. And
absolutely correct. I mean, I think I've been at several vendors throughout my career, and I think one of the things that anyone who is involved in the space always thinks that everyone is at the bleeding edge. And there's a tendency you want to drag everyone to the newest and shiniest thing and forget about all the other stuff you've even built as open source tech or as a vendor. And frankly, most people are not there, and they're in the middle or they're learning. And we sometimes need to really think hard about like, what is that balance? And it's always tricky.
No, I agree with you. And so, as one that reviewed the CFP submissions, tell us a bit about what you found interesting that we're going to hear that made it to the agenda and for people to check out.
Yeah, look, first of all, there's tons of talks about common technologies, Fluent Bit. Spotify has a fantastic talk coming up as well on I think Prometheus and their migration. I think these are the things. These are some of the talks that are there's a good balance of actual end users who are actual practitioners. So just someone talking to somebody about a technology is interesting, and there's some of those as well. But there's tons of talks by actual end users, customers, who were doing something and then they had to leverage a specific open source technology. This example that I'm going to give you is Spotify with the migration, Prometheus. That just brings some truth and reality and real world experience to that specific talk. And then that gives back to the community in the sense that people who are thinking of going on that journey or need to go on that journey soon have a real example to work with, not just theory, right? Vendors, people who are only talking about the technology or a project will be more theoretical in their talks, and those are required. But there's also a really good, strong mix of these customer-led or end-user-led conversations.
Any other talks that come to mind that you would recommend people to attend? Obviously, you have your own talk,
right.
Obviously recommending all the audience to join that or to follow that on the recording afterwards. But beyond that, things that you as someone who reviewed the submissions, that you found it, said, wow, this is something that I am excited to hear.
Right.
That.
I think while we talked about, we don't want to only go to the bleeding edge, I think there's also a complete reality that there's a talk, I forget who it is now, keep in mind, I've not got a photographic memory, I apologize.
No worries.
But there is a talk on LLMs. And I think, again, yes, you have to talk about a lot of the usual stuff that people will do regularly, but you have to talk about the bleeding edge stuff also. And to that end, AI and LLMs is becoming so prominent that I think people are also looking for guidance as to how do I actually leverage this. And I do apologize, I don't remember the talk, but I explicitly looked at it and I said this one has to be there. It might even be a keynote, I'm not 100% sure at this point.
So the Linux Foundation, the CNCF, have a rich suite of open source observability stack and offering. I'm an advocate of that, obviously, as a CNCF ambassador, but I'm actually curious to hear your opinion as an observability matter expert. What's your take? What are the major projects? We mentioned a few names here, but when you look at it as a stack, how do you view the open observability stack and how it's put to use by small and large companies?
Oh, such a broad question. So let me start with my expertise, and then we can maybe fan out from there. I think, first of all, a lot of these projects are now pretty popularly in use across a lot of organizations. I'll cover about 4 that I'm more comfortable with. Let's talk about, first of all, Kubernetes as a way to run things is almost, you don't have to even say it, like it's everywhere. And the more people go to the cloud, the more they're going to adopt that. That then generates all these other issues when it comes to complexity of the data, because yes, Kubernetes, but it generates other complexities to run your environment. Putting that aside, so that's one obvious one. But Prometheus and everything around metrics and Prometheus is virtually interlinked. I have not come across too many organizations that don't know. I mean, you do come across them, but Prometheus is almost synonymous with metrics. I mean, it is, it literally is, but there's not many organizations that don't start somewhere small with Prometheus and then graduate to something bigger, maybe a vendor, maybe something else, maybe they want to run it by themselves in a more sophisticated way, but that's almost a set in stone. Like if you're doing metrics, you probably have or had done Prometheus at some point. Yeah. Now obviously there are vendors like Datadog and stuff, maybe you never started that, but in the open source world, many users genuinely use Prometheus. Fluent Bit is another one that comes to mind when it comes to log data especially. Now, all these technologies are going to converge and are converging to do more, not Prometheus, but Otel and Fluent Bit are going to converge. But they still have their strengths and weaknesses, and Fluent Bit is very strong when it comes to logs. And the agents have been out there, Fluentd, Fluent Bit. And so that's another one that is ubiquitously used and just foundational in some sense that you'll see it everywhere. What I'm starting to notice with Otel, the Otel Collector, not the standard, the data model, but the Otel, the collector itself, it is how rapidly it is being picked up by outside of tracing. So it started off with tracing, some metrics, but for the most part, it wasn't a thing for logs. What I'm seeing now, and that's my area, so I'll speak to that a little bit. What I'm seeing now is consistently, customer by customer, Otel collectors are becoming the norm. And so if you are not integrating with an Otel collector, if you don't know how to work with that data format, you as a vendor or you as an end technology, whether it be vendor technology or open source technology, are not in play for logging. So that's been a reasonably quick transition, quick in the scheme of things. So those are the things that stand out. That's the stack that I see most commonly out there. Jaeger, we do see it, but with tracing, there's a lot of it out there, but it's very concentrated. So those who use it, they will be very familiar with Jaeger, Zipkin, and so on and so forth. But those who don't sometimes will not have adopted tracing. So there's a real sort of a binary component to tracing.
And you mentioned Otel with logging picking up later, but just to be on the fair side, that was the last signal to have matured. So obviously tracing was the first, for our audience who doesn't know, just to give the context, so tracing was the first signal to reach GA, then metrics, and logging was the last one. So fairly enough, it took us as a project a lot of time to reach that point. And obviously once it was GA and ready for production, then as you said, we see the pickup.
And let me clarify, what I mean by that is after it became so mature in GA, the speed at which people have picked up is what I'm more referring to than anything else.
Yeah. And actually you mentioned also Fluent Bit, and obviously it's part of the suite now by Chronosphere after the acquisition. Congratulations on that again. Many people ask about the relationship between Fluent Bit and OpenTelemetry sitting under this broad category of collection, obviously specifically in logs, although each one fans out to a bit broader than just that. How do you see that synergy and your product innovation, and you have the broader vision of that? So how do you, and you alluded to converging that. Can you give us a bit more about this convergence process that you envision?
Well, let's talk a little bit about how I envision the two side by side first. So Otel is both a standard of how data should be, the model of data format, not formats, but how data should be structured, the actual data model that Otel has for tracing or now logging as well. I think Fluent Bit is an implementation of a collector / pipeline, or not Fluent Bit, but Chronosphere telemetry pipeline and Fluent Bit, and how you can configure Fluent Bit. So being a bit vendor specific, just because we talked about the acquisition, that's a vendor specific, sorry, that is a implementation of how do you do a pipeline. It's one implementation, not the only implementation out there. And Fluent Bit can be configured to be a pipeline as well. So it is an implementation, as is Otel's collector is an implementation. So that's one place where they are similar in what they do. However, Fluent Bit embraces and adopts, as customers need, the Otel data model standard. So it's not like hey, we have our own standard, Fluent Bit has its own standard. That's not what the case is. The case is that Fluent Bit will adopt what it needs to be effective in the market. That's how to look at these two. When it comes to convergence, I mean, Otel, I think, is pretty clear. I think with metrics, logs, traces, I mean, that's already happened and it's converged, and Fluent Bit is now in that same direction too, which is it was primarily started with logs, and now it's heading there with tracing as well, tracing and metrics.
So in terms of the tool, not the standard, in terms of the tool, the collector, so Otel Collector and Fluent Bit, you see them living side by side, and when you recommend that as an architectural patterns to customers, you just see them as two alternatives for the same purpose, or do you see it as complementary in some areas? How do you envision that as a holistic? We're talking about open observability, so
right.
Looking at it broadly as a stack or as a suite, how would you envision that?
They sit side by side in the sense that they are both pipelines and they're both collectors in the sense that they can do similar things. I will not go too deep into which one is better. It starts getting a little bit outside of my area of what I will be comfortable in saying, use this versus that. But at the highest level, they're two different implementations with their strengths and weaknesses and what they can do. Yeah.
And I could, by the way, recommend a good friend of mine, Henrik, who's going to be here on the second part of this show, has an excellent talk and actually comparing and putting that side by side. So I highly recommend the proposed recommendations for talks from Open Observability Summit. And as I mentioned, he will also be a guest on the second part of this episode to help me cover the highlights after. This is recorded before the beginning of Open Observability Summit, but he will be with me after and will bring you the highlights. So stay tuned for the second part of this one. And we mentioned several times already AI ML, so it's time to talk about this hot topic that everyone talks about. We hear so much about that. What's your take on how AI, ML, Gen AI, LLMs, and the likes are going to impact our domain, the domain that you've been around for so many years in monitoring and observability?
Right. I'll start from my past because AI is not new. I think Gen AI is, well, not I think, Gen AI is new, but AI itself is not new. And, you know, ML, let's just start with the word ML. I think machine learning has been something that vendors, open source technologies, have, maybe not open source so much, but vendors have always tried to incorporate into their products one way or another. It has varying levels of success, not very high levels of success, because it took a lot to get the systems to do what you wanted. The output you wanted from those systems required a lot of configuration of one type or another. So they were owners to work with to get the outcomes you wanted. The outcomes are excellent, and I won't be vendor specific. Every vendor has some form of AI, ML, and let's just call it ML for the purpose of this conversation. They were successful up to a point. Maybe 5-10% of every vendor's customer base would get benefit out of that AI technology. That would be the predominant case studies those vendors would put out there, but it was not the predominant level of success because it's so difficult to get it to work. And I could name thousands, not thousand companies, but hundreds of companies or tens of companies, whatever that number is, would get you the same percentage. What has happened with Gen AI is that the level of effort needed by people to make it do what it needs to do for the people as an outcome is surprisingly lower, other than obviously having a model and setting up a model and things like that. There's that. But the level of effort required in configuration and tweaking, that's not as high as those older technologies. And I mean, AI in general, not just for observability, has had that same effect, right? And so you see, ChatGPT, the most popular sort of AI thing out there. The level of ease with which people can use it to get reasonably good results and very good results. With observability, I would say there is still hesitance to say perfect for us, we'll use it for everything, because it won't give you perfect 100% accurate results. And there is that sort of tension of like, hey, I'm in an incident resolution situation. I can't just trust this thing that gives me 80% level of accuracy on whatever it's trying to give me information on. However, people are now I see customers increasingly trying to say, what's this AI thing? Should I test it out? Some customers are further along and they have their own models.
Let's be more concrete.
Yeah.
That's very, very high level. Let's take it concretely. What kinds of functionalities, what kinds of, where in the flow of, you mentioned a bit alluded to root cause analysis. Where do you see AI put to practice in day-to-day? If I'm an SRE, if I'm an engineer, if I'm a developer, take me to the practicalities of where AI will help me in my day-to-day.
I'll talk with examples with customers I've spoken with, so we'll keep it that. Things like summarizing, what do these logs mean? That's becoming a common use case, or like, tell me what all these things mean, try to correlate them for me. So they're assistants to particular, SREs or things like people like that who are in the fact there's an incident, they troubleshoot it, but there's just too much data. So these AI technologies are excellent, or Gen AI in general, LLMs are excellent at taking lots of textual data. Logs is a very good example of that. Trace is another one. Metrics also in some ways, but hey, just tell me what this stuff means. Summarize it for me in language that I can understand. So I don't want to use my brain to sift through all of this. Can you just do it for me quickly? Now there's a level of accuracy, so you got to be careful as a user of this stuff to how much you should trust it, but that's a concrete example of what people are doing. Another example is people have things like Cursor or other sort of tools where they want to string a bunch of technologies together, or string a bunch of tools together. Again, it's a productivity enhancement. I want to string Sentry, I want to string Slack, I want to string a vendor technology or an open source monitoring technology, Prometheus, for example, Prometheus. I want to string all this together and ask questions of my LLM, and not just in the context of one particular thing like metrics. I want to know this incident happened, Slack has this information, let's combine that with this metric or these metrics and give me a sense of what's going on. So those are some concrete ways we've seen customers use this technology. But why they trust it is because it's relatively easy to use.
So I think we're getting to the top of our time here, but can you share how people can follow you, where they can, how they can reach out?
How can they reach out to me? Good question. LinkedIn is the easiest way. So reach out to me, connect with me on LinkedIn. And if not, reach out to Chronosphere or reach out to me through Chronosphere. You'll see me on some the Chronosphere videos and things like that, and you can reach out to Chronosphere as well.
Sounds good. Cool. Thank you very much, Alok, for joining me. And to our audience, as I mentioned on the second part of the episode, I'll be covering the highlights of Open Observability Summit. I'll be joined by Henrik Rexed, who's an observability veteran and a fellow CNCF Ambassador. And together we'll bring you everything you need to know about the event. So stay tuned for the second part of this episode. Thank you very much again, Alok, for joining me.
Thanks so much.
Pleasure having you.
Welcome back to the second part of our special episode. I'm here with Henrik, and we're recording it a few days after the Open Observability Summit and OpenTelemetry Community Day in Denver. And we're here to share with you the highlights from this unique event, straight from the event speakers and your faithful CNCF ambassadors on site. Hey, Henrik, thanks for joining me, and of course for all your support throughout this episode.
Thanks for having me here, and I think happy to be back in France after a couple of hours of flights and a long weekend to recover.
Yeah, that was intense, but then again, good to do that as close as possible, so it's still fresh and top of mind for us. And dovetailing with the first part of the episode and the discussion I had with Alok, you did actually an interesting comparative analysis and benchmarking of Otel Collector versus Fluent Bit, which you also shared on your talk at Open Observability Summit. So how about you tell us a bit about your key finding from this benchmarking and analysis?
So yeah, this benchmark was very focused on comparing Fluent Bit version 4 and the collector, the latest version of the collector. I mean, at the one that I used was version 0.126, but whatever. I think in general perspective, I think from a logging perspective, Fluent Bit is a beast. Very, very efficient, very powerful to process very large volumes of logs for a very limited number of resources. So usually you can consume with Fluent Bit 15 to 20 megs max, a couple of mini cores. The parsing experience, I mean, from a design perspective, I think both tools are quite similar. It's just that you're used to use one logic or the other. But I think, yeah, if you have to deal with logs, Fluent Bit is fantastic. Since Fluent Bit version 2, they had started to introduce this notion of supporting metrics and supporting traces. And they started to introduce this notion of processors. So if you're familiar with the collector, there's this notion of processors. So it's not the same naming. They've decided to add like a technology that allow you to do changes on data on the same thread as the input plugin. So when you receive data, boom, you're transforming it. Or you can do the same thing on the output. Just before I'm sending it out, I can do like a final transformation. So processor, I think, is an amazing technique. And I don't know if it's been introduced just for the support of metrics and traces or to add this multi-thread mechanism. But surprisingly, most of the actions or plugins that or things we can do with metrics or traces is only accessible in the processor side. So if you know Fluent Bit, there's the other plugins like filter, parsers, and everything. This is only for the log side. Metrics and traces, you will never be able to take advantage of those. So you'll have to stick to the processors available. So there's a really limited, as of now, list of processors available. So you can modify things. You could drop things in the metrics. It's interesting that you can change you can drop cardinality. So if you have a metrics that is quite expensive with a large cardinality, you have the options to I'm going to drop that label because it sounds expensive. So in that sense, they bring the right features. So for the metric side, just to cover the metrics, I think one big downside, I think, for the metrics is obviously the fact that when you're dealing with metrics, you're probably going to scrape metrics from Prometheus, get some metrics from OpenTelemetry. So you may want to convert those metrics because maybe the metrics is cumulative or the metric is delta. So having the options to say, oh, my backend is supporting cumulative format or delta, I need to change format. And I think metric conversion is like a must-have in any way when you deal with metrics. And as of now, yeah, Fluent Bit doesn't have it, so it's kind of a pain. So meaning that you will have to stick with mainly cumulative backends because you're going to scrape Prometheus, and I think that's a big limitation for metrics. So I think here I will definitely stay with the collector because it has all the right features for that. And also one thing which is basic, but it's enrichment. If I'm getting metrics from I don't know, a destination, an exporter in the cluster, I may want to enrich the metrics with adding the Kubernetes metadata. So they have a Kubernetes filter, but it's a filter. So it's meaning only usable for logs. So no way of using it for metrics, which then you're collecting, but no way of enriching it. Or you can enrich, but you have to do it manually, which could be a pain. And last is traces.
That's important.
Yeah, if you're dealing with metrics, I think enrichment. I think not even with metrics. In general, in observability.
All telemetry needs, I have a whole talk just about the importance of metadata in observability, and it's all about the fact that to really leverage observability, you can't do without the metadata. And metadata is exactly this enrichment, these extra fields that help you assign it to relevant technical entities or even business entities. This is my account. This is the premium program that needs to get extra attention. So all these things, this is exactly metadata that you put on the on your telemetry.
Yeah, and I think it's a point. I think sending raw data to a backend, it's going to be like a big data lake. Then there's no value. And I think the metadata you add is making sure that your data will be indexed or at least attached to something, and then you can take value. And specifically now these days with all the people jumping and talking about AI and LLM on top of observability, if you have no context, then I don't think any AI system will take benefits of the data. But that is my opinion, for sure.
And you wanted to talk about traces, the last signal, and comparing in that regard?
Yeah, in fact, so with version 4 of Fluent Bit that was announced at KubeCon London, they introduced a really big missing piece when it comes to traces. It's sampling. Before version 4, you could just send traces and you could add some stuff on top of that, but nothing. You were not able to do anything. So when it comes to traces, you definitely want to sample. They have two sampler in Fluent Bit version 4, the probabilistic sampler and the tail sampling. So the probabilistic sampler is going to be like a head sampling decision. So applying like a fixed ratio on sample without making sure it's consistent over the various spans of your trace. So I think this one is, from my perspective, I will never use it. And then you have the other one called tail sampling. So similar to the one that is available on the OpenTelemetry Collector, you can define your roles based on I want to have this latency, this error code, making condition on any attributes that could be Boolean, string, or whatever. And then you define your sets of roles, and then you will actually apply the sampling. And I did a benchmark, and when I was at OpenSearch Summit, I exposed numbers, and I saw two things that were strange.
Open Observability Summit, yeah.
Oh, so yeah, Open Observability Summit, and I saw two things that was a bit strange. So the first one, I saw that, okay, so first I see the collector memory increasing. So when I had the graphs, I exposed those graphs, and I was wrong. So I want to basically this today with you will have the the different opinion from what I shared at during my talk. The first thing is collector was increasing in memory. I say, why are we increasing memory? Or do we have a memory leak in the actual collector on tail sampling? And so I was very worried about that. So I did a lot of pre-profs and things during the conference before presenting the talk. And then at the end of the talk, I look at them, and in fact, it was not sampling; it was cumulative delta. So then I did another test where I did another instance of collector that was just in charge of converting my metrics to the right format, and then the other one for sampling. And as a result, the memory, the collector that increased in memory usage is only on the cumulative delta collector that was doing the metric conversions, and then the one on sampling is
That's
like
for the metric, just for those who don't understand.
Yeah.
So one for the metric, the cumulative delta, and then when you strictly speak about the trace sampling, you saw that it was flat, no memory increase. So maybe for those who do listen, and I do highly recommend, by the way, checking out Henrik's talk. The recording is now available, I think, even on the Linux Foundation's channel on YouTube. But just know that this is actually a hot update on hot patch on the talk.
On the
that
talk,
actually,
yeah.
there's a new updates to the benchmark.
So yes, at the end, yeah, the collector is super stable over time for sampling. So I'm really confirming that the collector is strong for traces, especially on sampling. And then when I had removed that huge spike in memory, you were obviously not seeing so much about Fluent Bit. So then when I did the opposite tests, then I saw that Fluent Bit, yeah, there's a problem. Because at the end, Fluent Bit usually consumes about 15 megs of memory. And here, when you're using Fluent Bit only for sampling and nothing else, the memory is growing over time without being released. So that sounds, first of all, kind of scary. And then I reach out after 8 hours or 9 hours, 1.2 gigs. And yeah, the memory is not released. So for me, I opened a ticket yesterday on the Fluent Bit repository that I think there's a memory leak on the tail sampling. So I think we should probably resolve this. So yeah, my conclusion when I said tail sampling, Fluent Bit seems to be again the champions in terms of resource usage. No, it's not true. It is what I've observed is the collector for sampling. It's a beast compared to Fluent Bit as of now. So I think if the community resolve that issue, I think we should have a normal. We should expect a normal behavior from a Fluent Bit perspective when it comes to sampling.
Sounds good.
But
So we have that one on the Otel and the Fluent Bit, and again, highly recommend folks to follow up and check out the full report, and also follow Henrik. He probably will share more on these findings on his channels. I'll share the channels. It will be posted on the show notes wherever you podcast app or YouTube or not, and highly recommend following up because he brings very good findings also on his show. Is It Observable? Highly recommended there. And I want to move to some other updates. I can share maybe on my side one of the biggest news that came out of Open Observability Summit was the release of OpenSearch 3.1. I had the privilege of giving a keynote at Open Observability Summit and share about it. So maybe very briefly for the audience who followed, we've been covering also this project for quite some time. Quite a few goodies. Very briefly, GPU acceleration for index build is now GA, which, by the way, very nice cost performance improvements, like shaving time to build by a factor of 9.3, reducing costs by almost 4 times compared to CPU-based solutions. So GPU acceleration so far looks very good. A lot of performance things on that one. Also improving search recall on disk. So for those who use the compression with the default rescoring support, now you can use the ×4 compression. Great way to keep the high search recall quality while keeping the performance and efficiency benefits of the compression. For those who are asking about AI and all of that, that is the buzzwords, and you probably heard that we introduced the model context protocol and OpenSearch 3.0. So now also more updates, new APIs like the update tools, list tools, and all of that. So keeping on work on the MCP side, and of course, on observability front, quite a bit of news. Keep improving the correlation experience between logs, traces, and the Otel compliance with support for custom index names containing the Otel spans, logs, and the service maps. So it makes it easy. And by the way, also for those who do not follow the Otel format, users can still map the custom fields, timestamp, service name, span ID, trace ID, all of these to the log indexes. So both are supported. Maybe one note also on the PPL query language. Quick PPL, for those who don't remember, this is the piped processing language, query language that queries across the different signals. So also on the query front, there's now support to analyze and query nested JSON structures and also convert nested JSONs to tabular format with the new flatten and expand commands. So for those who are struggling with the nested JSONs, I think this would be a very good thing. This is among like 20 other new PPL commands and functions. So I'll share again on the show notes also the link to the release notes. But check it out. Very nice to see that. So that's on that. I don't know, Ulrich, if you have any insights or anything that you wanted to share on that.
I think from on the during Open Observability Con, what I was really enjoyed, to be honest, there's the talk delivered by VJ from eBay. So he did an amazing keynote, by the way, on KubeCon London, and he co-presented what they're doing at eBay about their traces, the logs, how they implemented the custom Prometheus sharding they're doing, how they are managing traces as high volumes. Very interesting talk, especially when it comes to a company talking about what they're achieving, and especially eBay is doing a lot of great things around observability. So I thought it was a really great session, and I really enjoyed to understand what they're doing and the challenges that they had going through that journey, because they implemented very advanced, very early stage projects, so they had to basically either modify or adjust it depending on their need. So very interesting to learn from them for sure.
And
another
I should
one.
note, first of all, before moving on, a word from my side on this. First of all, Vijay, but he was co-presenting it with another colleague, I think Xin Wei Tang. So just to give the due credit to both speakers on stage. And yeah, Vijay is a good friend, and actually I also hosted him here on the show, where he shared more on eBay's planet scale observability. So for followers who might have missed this episode, an excellent episode, I'll share it on the show notes, where he gave a bit more. What he said on this talk at Open Observability Summit is a very specific part of the system. On the episode he explained, and I think one thing that I found in addition to what you said that was nice to see is like a really good example for a company in the scale of eBay that uses open source observability first, and secondly, wherever it doesn't fit exactly its needs, they didn't give up and then build yourself homegrown or go to a vendor or something like that. They really looked for ways to stick with the open source while making the necessary modifications and adjustments, even if it meant going astray from the common best practices in the community. And also, by the way, engaging the community to enhance the open source based on their feedback. So, many companies, especially the large end of the scale of the enterprises, when they reach this friction, they too quickly someone in leadership reaches this conclusion. Okay, this open source is nice for the small ones, but for us, we are special. Our requirements, our workload types and volume and whatnot is very, very specialized because we are hyperscalers or whatnot. It's not for us. And then they transition into, again, either build your own, homegrown solution, or again, going to vendors where they can ask them to tailor it specifically for their needs. I really like this statement, very clear statement by Vijay and Xinwei Tang that was no, we believed in the open source. We did understand that there are some constraints in the open source, and we found a way, either again adjusting it, extending it, and also contributing back feedback issues. I don't know if they're also going to contribute to like PRs for the solutions of these, how to manage, scaling architectures and so on and so forth. I don't have it off the top of my head, all the changes that they suggested, but I, again, highly recommend watching this talk recording. Also from this perspective of, if you hear from your bosses, no, this is not for us, there's another way.
So one thing that I really liked was the way they manage traces. To be honest, they want to sample, so they use tail sampling, and they want to do the span metrics connector, and that could provide a lot of pressure. And they find a way which is smart. So they are pushing it to a storage, and then there's a collector that pulls out the data afterward. So they are basically making the spans live a bit longer in that storage, and then triggering the collector afterward. So meaning that when the collector brings the spans, the trace, all the spans that are giving trace will be probably there already. So then the sampling decision will be done in a faster way. So then they are having better control on the memory consumptions of their collector. So then I asked, so at the end you have like maybe a 2, 3 minutes, 4 minutes delay. So you're not able to use it for live things. And then he said a really good point. And I think they're doing the same thing for the logging perspective. And he said there was a really good point. Said for us, the live data is metrics. And then if something goes wrong, then we jump into traces. But for the moment something goes wrong, then the traces will be there. So it's not a blocking point to have it few 3 minutes afterwards the actual event. So I thought it was the approach was really interesting and very smart for sure.
And I think it brings up a very good point in terms of really understanding your architecture and your system requirements and needs. Because if you don't have the need for real time, putting in this constraint will strain your architecture and limit your flexibility in doing some trade-offs. And this is a very valid understanding. This is the way that we run our SREs, our DevOps teams, and we start with metrics and then go to the during the root cause analysis. But this is not real time. So once you understand like the system architecture and the requirements, I think you have more room to find the best solution for these requirements. So I think a very good point. Thanks for sharing that, Henrik. I think both of us were also attending the talk about Kotlin SDK for Otel by Hansen Ho. Did you say a word about that?
I think I think it was a great insight because I'm not a Android developer for sure. So the previous Kotlin SDK was more like a fork Java approach, and he makes the point that running Java based logic into an Android phone is not the best ideal things. So the idea was to sharing the fact that there will be a new Kotlin SDK on the way. So they're working on it, and that will provide a lot of values for Android developers to produce more client-side instrumentation from an Android perspective. And I think it makes sense. I think realizing that frameworks doesn't fit in where they should live and adjust that over time, I think shows that the community is continuously evolving, improving, and providing a lot of values to our users. So if you're also using it or you want to use it for, I don't know, more on JavaScript, I mean, client side is going to be refactoring, but if you have specific needs and then contributing back and changing it and suggesting new way of doing things, I think will be beneficial for all the community in general.
Yeah, and he's a great guy. He's also an approver on the Android SDK and working group under OpenTelemetry. By the way, Hanson Ho was here on the show as well for a broader perspective on mobile observability and how to achieve it with Otel. So again, for those who missed the episode with Hanson Ho, highly recommended, because I'm not an Android developer myself, or a mobile developer in general. So for me, it's also very new. I come from the backend mindset, and it's very, very interesting. First, to understand the constraints of such an environment, the mobile environment, the fragmentation of this environment when you need to, especially in Android. So while iOS is still a walled garden and more well kept, Android is a wild desert there. There's so many things and so many versions and versions back that you need to support. So very, very interesting to see how to adapt observability best practices when it comes to mobile, and also to see how OpenTelemetry takes very, very big steps into mobile. So not just backend mindset, but also looking at the front end. By the way, also for web applications and so on. So definitely look at the front end. Even if you're a front end guy, don't dismiss Otel. One note about the talk: while he was doing this lightning talk, he did share the GitHub repo. It's currently still under his company GitHub repo, but it's supposed
Embrace,
to be transitioning to Embrace, yeah. And but it's going to be donated to Otel and being transitioned under Otel repo. So if you're looking at it, maybe by the time you hear this episode, it will already be in the new GitHub repo. And if not, know that this is the fact that it's under Embrace. It's just temporary. Hopefully to have that moving to transitioning to Otel very soon and being an official part of the Otel OpenTelemetry project. So yeah, another interesting talk. Give us another of your highlights, Ulrich.
There's two talks that I really enjoyed. I mean, more than two, in fact. But I think I think it was very well presented for people to understand the structure of a spans and the life of a span. So there was a story of the life of a spans, and they took a character called Spanley. Spanley was born in the code, instrumented, then go through basically being mature in the collector and then moving on. So showing how the spans are produced and how they're living within our systems. It was really an original way of explaining the structure and giving a recommendation using the semantic convention, or using span events or not. So I think it was if you want to get more details about spans and understand more the structure on what type of data you should add in your spans, I think you should check this talk. Well presented by Jamie and Yuri. So great session for sure. And the other one was more on the collector side. So there was two talk about the collector, one with Alex Boughton and Yuri on basically fine-tuning collectors and what you should do with the collector. So do some rate limiting, using batch and memory limiter, do some tail samp. So they had a couple of recommendational things on the pipeline side. And then there was another talk delivered from one of the engineer of Biplane. I don't remember the name of the session, but it was mainly about fine-tuning the collectors again. And here, the way he presented the talk was about experience from customers having issues where they saw collector consuming too much memory, and then they had to fine-tune. And the collector, the exporter, every exporter has the options to define like a size of a queue, because data will jump into that exporter. That exporter will have a specific size for the queue, and then you can have some retry if the desired backend is not responding. So if you don't size it well, then yeah, you can have some surprises. So really great recommendation from the session. So I would also recommend to watch that recording.
Yeah, the speaker is Denton Kritz. I hope that I'm pronouncing the name correctly. And the talk was about build resilient telemetry pipelines, mastering the OpenTelemetry Collector's persistent queue. So yeah, and in general, this definitely is something. You also saw that when you needed to tune, going back to your own benchmarks with Otel Collector, with the sampling configuration. So it is important for those who practice and use Otel Collector to understand the tuning and the configurations and make sure that it's suitable for your needs, and obviously not fall into pitfalls that may I don't know, maybe do some spiking memory consumption or something else. So good talks on that. Maybe sharing from my side on some other talks that I attended. So there was a good talk by folks from Broadcom. They shared about how they scaled OpenTelemetry to handle 3 million metrics per second and 500,000 spans per second using Kafka-powered ingestion. It was very nice. Vashishta, I think, was the speaker. I'm trying to remember the other speaker's name. And it was very interesting. First, again, talking about high scale companies trying to adopt Otel and adapt it to their scaling and needs and patterns, going back to my comment about eBay. And this one specifically was also very interesting, looking at doing it across the org from mobile to mainframe and of course multi-services and more modern architectures. So very, very nice to see. So once going back also to my comment about from Hanson Ho, OpenTelemetry is not just for the the microservice architecture, modern architectures, cloud native architectures in the backend. You can also use Otel for mobile. You can use it for mainframe and others, and even combining both in the same architecture. A great example. Another takeaway that I had from that is really the way that they handled the back pressure in the ingestion pipelines with Kafka. They've done a very nice job. Again, I highly recommended to see this one. And did you have anything to say about it? I don't know if you attended this talk or.
No, I didn't have I was going. I was on another session, but yeah, I would definitely. It was part of my list as well. I was interesting to see. So if you have any,
Yes.
how did they do for the mainframe? Because usually mainframe is a big question mark. Sometimes, how do I, if you're using COBOL or CSCS or whatever? So how did they share any insights about how they did instrumentation on that area?
I don't know off the top of my head how they tailor the instrumentation. Probably it's not something that comes out of the box, and they needed to tailor themselves the sort of the I don't know if it's SDKs or if they actually had like receivers that are designated for that. So interesting to go back to that note and see. Essentially, in Otel for audience, you know that there are two ways. Either you ship it from the source, or like an SDK that will take whatever they generate on the origin side and immediately make sure that it's emitted Otel native, or if the other way is to do the work in the OpenTelemetry Collector as a receiver, taking some proprietary protocol or not, and then converting it. So just for generally speaking, obviously it's broad strokes, not specifically for this use case. Interesting to go back and see how they handle that. Another interesting talk that I found, and as you can see, my favorite ones are end users, maybe because I've been around vendors and they're so keen to share their stuff anywhere. So, but getting really the end users are for me the interesting part. And another one was by Spotify. They really had a very interesting journey, like a 2-year journey of migrating and replacing in-house time series database and moving into VictoriaMetrics and Prometheus. So again, two very prominent open source projects in the metric side of the house, and showed very, very impressive figures. Like they talked about like 10 times faster query speeds, significant cost savings. So it was very interesting to hear it directly from the lady who leads the engineering in that side of the house. Were you able to attend that talk by Spotify?
No, I was not. I didn't have the chance to go there. I thought it was. I didn't pay attention. I thought it was a VictoriaMetrics talk, but I didn't see that was a use case. So that sounds very interesting. Sure.
Yeah, actually, I even think that Alok was mentioning it on one of his favorites from reviewing. Alok was just for those who missed the first part, he was on the reviewing committee for the CFP submission, the talk submission. I think he also said that this is something he was looking forward to. So it's interesting. Any other insights that you had? Some that you took from out of it?
Yeah, so I had there was a project that I heard about that was a year from now, a rumor says, oh, there's a team that is going to rewrite a collector, OpenTelemetry Collector, into Rust. And the team was actually at the conference.
Otel, by the way, is written in Go for those who don't know. Like the collector itself, that's the native, but now talking about something a bit more efficient in Rust.
Yeah, for sure, and more lightweight for sure. But so yeah, so the team presented the first release. So they were baking that components during a couple of months, and now they officially announced the first release. The
Is that
way
Rotel or just
yeah,
to
it's
name
called
the
Rotel.
folks?
Yeah, Rotel, exactly the name. And I think that they presented in a very clear way. It's not here to fully replace the collector. It's not designed for that. It's been designed because people are sometimes struggling having Lambda functions that you need to have a collector that could be quite heavy. So then it could slow down the startup time of your Lambda, and sometimes you have more constraints on your resources on your Lambda. It could be also if you have an edge device. So maybe the collector is a bit too heavy. So that's why Fluent Bit makes a lot of sense. And I think having like a very lightweight collector that is super efficient could make sense. So as of now, they don't provide like a pipeline structure language format. They have a predefined one. So it will basically get whatever is produced in OpenTelemetry and send it to a destination. So I may think that Rotel will be at the edge, and then you will send the data across the network to like a gateway collector where you have, of course, based on Go, the one that we all use. That has more logic. So I think it sounds very promising, and I think could resolve some constraints that we are facing in a very limited environments in terms of resources usage for sure.
Yeah, and it aligns with obviously with the best practices in terms of federated architecture for Otel collectors, that where you separate the concerns. So definitely, the company, by the way, behind it is called Streamfold, and it's currently under their GitHub repo. I'll share the link
Yes.
on the show notes. So very interesting to check out, and check out the repo as well for more details on this project. Going over my list, I think maybe one note that it was actually part of the Open Source Summit main event that preceded the Open Observability Summit, but it was very relevant for observability, which was about noisy neighbors with Jonathan Terry. Do you want to say a word about that?
Yeah, but I think noisy neighbors is a real problem, especially on infrastructure when you're sharing infrastructure. So any virtualization, so it could be VMs, containers, and of course Kubernetes, because we are running code and we're competing for using CPU or memory or disk or networking card, and I think it's a big problem. I think Google did a paper about this where they were measuring a 5x more increase of response times due to noisy neighbors. So Jonathan is currently building a solution with invariance, where it's going to basically to detect those noisy neighbors. You need to basically have a really, really, really short generality. So he's speaking data at a milliseconds perspective. So then you can see those noisy and the neighbors and the impact of them. So at the moment, the way it works, it's produce the data, sends to an S3 buckets in a Parquet file, and then you can produce like a graph offline of the data. But I think they're working on something to sort of aggregate that data and expose it on time series, so they could be consumed by any vendors or any solution that we want. So then we can get back that data. I think it's a very important topic, and having something that tries to resolve it and brings data back, so then we can understand why and who is responsible, would be very beneficial for everyone.
Yeah, noisy neighbors being definitely something that we've all struggled with, so good to see that. One more point, by the way, from Open Observability Summit. One thing that I loved to see is actually a statement by Datadog on their keynote, their sponsored keynote, about the importance of open semantic conventions, open source semantic conventions. This is something that I've been pursuing for a long time, and I'm a true believer, but really hearing that from leading vendors in the industry, such as Datadog, is a great amplification for this and great validation for this, the recognition that the industry across the board, really, it's become clear that this is the way forward. And of course, hoping to see that very soon also adopted and implemented across the products and across the different vendors. And also maybe a segue to my own corner of the semantic conventions. There's my talk on the Open Source Summit. I had a talk about OpenTelemetry for CI/CD observability and the semantic conventions we created for that. There's a special interest group, a SIG, that we've established for that. So I gave a talk at the Open Source Summit about this topic in Denver. So check out the recording. I'll share it with you. And again, calling everyone who is interested in this field to join us and help us shape the semantic conventions and related specifications like environment variable propagation, context propagation over environment variables, and baggage propagation, and so on. Or in other areas of semantic conventions, the SemConv group, highly recommended for those who are passionate about these topics as well. I think we're at the top of the time that we have for this. So I wanted to thank you again, Henrik, for joining me and for all your support. And maybe you can tell the audience where they can follow up with you and touch base with you.
Yeah, so first of all, if you want to get, I produce some content on the YouTube channel called Is It Observable? So if you want to check it out here, there's a lot of video produced there. You can follow me on LinkedIn. So just search my name, Henrik Rexed, or you can also search for Is It Observable? There's also Is It Observable LinkedIn group. And also I'm part of Blue Sky, so you can reach out anywhere. I'm usually very responsive. So, and also part of the CNCF Slack. So if you have any topic or any discussions, just ping me there.
Sounds good. And as I mentioned before, all the contact details will also be on the show notes, including the excellent podcast that Henrik has. So check it out also on the show notes. And with that, I'd like to thank you again, Henrik, for joining me, and thanking our audience for joining us on this very special episode. It's been a privilege to have Open Observability Talks as a partner of Open Observability Summit, and to cover this very unique first ever community-led, foundation-led event designated for this topic of passion of both of us, open observability. As always, all the episodes can be found on your favorite podcast apps or on YouTube, so check it out. And many of the episodes are also live streamed, so on Twitch, YouTube Live, so you can follow us on X or on Blue Sky or on LinkedIn to get the live stream times to join, and then you can also ask your question in that. With that, I would like to thank you. We'll see you obviously on next month's episode. And until then, as I always say, may the open source be with you.